Welcome, dear listener. Tonight's story is one to be heard slowly, as if each word were placed like a pebble along a quiet garden path, guiding you toward rest. Let yourself be here. In the hush of this moment, your breathing can soften. The way the tide eases in and out upon a sleepy shore. Outside your window, imagine the night leaning in soft blue shadows stretching over the walls, a breeze tracing the air like an old lullaby. And within that quiet, you may find yourself stepping gently into another place. A place where time is unhurried, where rooms hold secrets as tender as a heartbeat, where love lingers in the air like the scent of something once familiar. This is the story of Liora, and the light she found in forgotten rooms. The manor had been hers for 3 weeks, though Liora still thought of it as the house by the sea, as if it were a character she had only just met, someone she wasn't sure would let her incompletely.it. Stood on a gentle cliff, the waves far below whispering in a language she didn't quite understand. In the mornings, mist gathered at the windows until it was chased away by pale gold sunlight. In the evenings, the house seemed to lean closer. To the shore, listening, Leora's footsteps made a hollow, unhurried sound along the wide hallway. The floors were old wood, uneven in places, holding the scent of salt and thyme. She moved slowly, fingertips grazing the wall where pale paint had faded into a wash of cream and soft gray. The house had many doors, some opened easily, swinging wide into airy rooms with tall windows and seashells on the sills. Others stayed stubbornly closed, no locks, no visible latches. Yet unmoving, as if waiting for a reason to open.it was one of those quiet, cloudy afternoons when she found herself pausing by a door she had passed before. The handle was cool beneath her palm. She wasn't expecting it to give way, and yet, with the faintest sigh, it turned. The hinges whispered as the door eased open, and a soft breath of air slipped past her, carrying a scent faint lavender and something like sun-warmed linen. The light inside was different. It wasn't from the window, it seemed to come from the walls themselves, a pale golden shimmer that made the dust motes sway as if they too were alive. Inside was a chair by a narrow window, its seat worn smooth. On the arm, a scarf lay folded wool, with one frayed edge. Leora stepped closer. Her fingers hovered above the fabric, and as she leaned in, a warmth bloomed in her chest, a memory she did not own, of sitting here, wrapped in that scarf, listening to someone hum softly nearby. The hum wasn't real, not in this moment. Yet her heart felt certain it had been. She sat in the chair. The wood creaked beneath her, a sound that felt oddly like a welcome. Outside, the sea moved slowly, gray and steady. Inside, the air seemed to settle around her. And for the first time since arriving, Liora felt the house watching her not as a stranger, but as someone it knew. She stayed until the light shifted, until the golden shimmer thinned into the gentle blue of evening. And when she left the room, closing the door with care, she knew she would come back. Later that night, as she drifted towards sleep, she thought of the scarf and of the feeling that someone somewhere had once been waiting in that chair for her. The morning came softly, wrapped in a haze of pale light. Liora woke to the sound of gulls calling far beyond the open window, their voices drawn thin by the distance. The sea was calm, only the faintest ripple of waves stretching toward the horizon. She lingered in bed for a while, listening to the slow ticking of the old clock in the hallway. It was a sound she'd grown fond of, steady, measured, never in a hurry, the kind of sound that could make an entire day feel unbroken. When she rose, the air in the house was cool, carrying the scent of the ocean. Her footsteps led her without thought toward the western hall, the side she had barely explored. The corridor was long, with tall windows on one side and a series of closed doors on the other. Each door looked the same, pale wood, brass handles, dulled with age. Yet she felt it again, that subtle pull, like a thread between her ribs and the space beyond one particular door. She touched the handle. No resistance this time. The door opened without a sound. The room beyond was hushed and dim, the light filtered through gauzy curtains the color of morning fog. Against the far wall stood a piano, black lacquer, dust catching the faint glow like specks of gold. One key was pressed down slightly, as if caught mid-note. Liora crossed the floor. Her fingertips skimmed the cool surface of the piano, tracing the grain where time had worn it smooth. When she touched the suspended key, it moved easily under her hand, and the note rang out low, warm and steady. The kind of sound that could rest in the air for a long while after it was gone. It felt almost as though someone had been playing here moments before. A fragment of melody rose in her mind, slow, unhurried, though she knew she'd never heard it before. Her chest ached with a quiet, nameless longing. On the music stand lay a sheet of paper. Not music, but handwriting, a single line. "The days are softer when you're here." She read it twice, the words brushing against her like a memory she couldn't quite catch. The room smelled faintly of tea and something sweeter, honey, perhaps. She closed her eyes, letting the scent sink in, and in that stillness, she almost felt another presence near her. Not close enough to see, but enough to feel the warmth at her side. When she opened her eyes, the curtains shifted in a breeze. Though the windows were closed, it was the kind of moment that made her doubt, just for an instant, whether she was alone. She left the room slowly, her fingers trailing along the piano until the last possible moment. The door shut behind her with a gentle click. For the rest of the day, Liora wandered through the manor as though listening for something. A faint hum in the air, a whisper in the walls. Each corner seemed to hold the echo of a life she had not lived yet felt she had loved. And in the evening, as the sun sank low and the sea turned silver, she stood in the hallway, wondering which door would open for her next. The day after the piano room, the weather turned soft and gray. Clouds moved low over the water, brushing the horizon, and the sea answered in a slow, silvery sway. The manor felt warmer inside, the air carrying the faint scent of rain before it falls. Liora had spent the morning in the library, a long, narrow room with shelves that stretched so high she had to tilt her head to follow them. Most of the books were worn with time, their spines faded into shades of sepia and deep green. She ran her fingertips along them absently, feeling the tiny ridges of embossed titles, until her hand stilled on one with no title at all, just smooth, unmarked leather. She pulled it down, expecting the weight of pages. Instead, the cover opened to reveal only a handful of yellowed sheets inside blank, but for a faint shadow of handwriting that had long since faded. When she tilted it toward the window, the faint impression of words caught the light. Not enough to read, just enough to make her wonder. Her gaze wandered, and that was when she noticed the mirror. It stood tall and narrow in the far corner, framed in dark wood carved with twisting vines. The glass was not clear, it held a softness, like a memory half remembered. She stepped closer, her reflection dim against the dusky silver. For a moment, she thought she saw herself as she was. But then, behind her shoulder, a shadow formed, not frightening, no, nothing in this house seemed meant to frighten, but quiet, still, as though it had always been there. A man's outline took shape, broad at the shoulders, tall, with hair that brushed just above his collar. His features were gentle, softened by the mirror's haze. She could not make out his eyes clearly, but she felt them, watching her as though he knew her. Liora didn't move. Neither did he. Then, slowly, his hand lifted, and with one fingertip he drew across the glass. When he stepped back, there was a word written in the fine layer of dust. Liora, her name. She stared at it, the letters delicate, curved, as if written by someone who had traced them many times before. When she blinked, the reflection behind her was gone. The mirror showed only herself now, standing in the stillness. But the word remained, faint but unmistakable. She reached out and pressed her fingertips to the glass where the final letter curled. The surface was cool, but beneath it she imagined warmth, as though, in another time, his hand had been there instead of hers. The house seemed to hum quietly around her. It was the same hum she had felt in the scarf room, the same one in the piano room, a thread drawing her closer, tying her not just to the manor, but to him. As the day faded into a muted evening, Liora left the library, but not before glancing back at the mirror one last time. The word was still there. That night, as she lay in bed with the sound of the sea beyond the windows, she thought of the shape of his hand and how gently it had moved to write her name. The following morning carried a softness so deep it felt almost like a dream. Light moved slowly through the house, spilling across the hallway floors in muted gold. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of the sea brushed against the air like a steady heartbeat. Liora found herself drawn again to the west wing. Her hands skimmed the rail of the staircase, polished by countless palms long before hers. Each step creaked in the same rhythm as yesterday, as though the house itself remembered where her feet would fall. The first two rooms she had opened still seemed to hum faintly behind their doors: the scarf room with its lavender scent, the piano room with its single pressed key and the words on the paper stand, and the library. The memory of her name in the dust on that mirror.it was on the third floor, tucked beneath the slope of the roof that she found the next door. It stood slightly ajar, a breath of warm air curling out into the cool hallway. Inside, the room was filled with light, not sharp daylight, but a kind of golden, mellow glow, as if the sun had caught itself in the curtains and refused to leave. There was a table near the window, and on it, a vase with a single flower. The bloom was pressed, flat and delicate, its edges curled, but the pale blush of color still clung to the petals. Next to it lay a small journal. The leather was cracked, the ribbon marker frayed. She opened it slowly. Inside, the ink was faded but legible, and it was here, reading in the quiet, that she began to understand. The words were not hers, yet as she read them, something in her chest tightened with the familiarity of an old, unspoken truth. We built our days here, between the hum of the piano and the scent of lavender in the rooms. She walks the halls like sunlight itself, and I am only ever at peace when she is near. The entries continued, written in a hand that curved gently, each line steady and deliberate. He wrote of evenings spent watching the tide from the window seat, of winter mornings warmed by her laughter, of quiet afternoons when nothing was said. Because nothing needed to be, Liora turned the pages, and the name appeared again and again, her name. Not hers, perhaps, but a name so close in sound and feeling that she knew, somehow, he had been writing about her. A strange warmth spread through her, not shock, not fear, but the deep, still certainty that this was not the first time they had been here together, perhaps not in this lifetime. But in some way the heart understands better than the mind. She imagined him, the tall figure from the mirror, walking these halls beside her, his hand brushing the doorframe as he passed, his voice low and calm when he spoke her name. The house, she thought, had kept him here. Or perhaps it had kept them. When she left the room, the journal still rested on the table, but a single page had been turned as though by an unseen hand. She glanced back at it before closing the door. If she returns, I will know her by the light in her eyes. the days began to fold into one another gently, each one touched by the rhythm of the sea and the slow turning of light across the manor walls. Liora no longer wandered the halls aimlessly. She moved with quiet intention, her steps guiding her to each closed door with the certainty of someone following a map written in the heart. One by one, they opened for her. The first door led to a room with shelves of glass bottles, each one holding something small: smooth stones, faded petals, seashells polished pale. She ran her fingers over the cork stoppers, imagining him placing each object there as if preserving the world they loved together. Another room smelled faintly of beeswax and old paper. The desk by the window held envelopes tied with ribbon. None addressed, none sealed, just waiting, it seemed, for a hand to write what the heart could not say aloud. And in each room she felt him. Not as a figure she could see, but as a warmth near her shoulder, a shift in the air that made her chest take in the gentlest way. Sometimes it was in the faint trace of a handprint in dust, sometimes in the sway of a curtain when no breeze had touched it. Once she thought she heard the softest sound, a quiet inhale, like someone standing very close behind her. But there was never fear. Only that same still, certain comfort, like leaning into a memory and finding it leans back. She began to speak to him in these rooms, her voice low and unhurried. Not questions, not demands, just small pieces of her day, how the tide had looked that morning, how the gulls had flown low over the water, how the scarf from that first room still smelled faintly of lavender. She did not know if he answered, but sometimes when she finished speaking, the room felt just a little warmer, as if her words had been gathered and kept. On the fifth evening since finding the journal, she sat in the piano room. The light was dimming, the keys soft under her fingertips. Without thinking, she played a single note, the same low, warm tone she'd touched before. It lingered, filling the room, and in its echo she felt something like a hand brushing lightly against hers. She closed her eyes and let the moment breathe. There was no need to move, no need to speak, only to exist here together in the space where time had softened enough for two hearts to meet again. The house seemed to approve. The walls held the sound of the note long after it had faded. The air stayed warm even as the night deepened, and Liora knew whether or not she ever saw him clearly, she would spend her days here opening doors, letting the light in and feeling him there beside her. The final door waited longer than the others. Liora had passed it many times near the very end of the upper hallway, where the ceiling slopped low and the light was always honey warm in late afternoon. It was on a day when the sea lay still as glass that she stopped before it. Her hand rested on the handle, and she felt deep within that this was the last of the locked places, not locked in the way of keys and bolts, but in the way of hearts that open only when the time is right. The door yielded with a slow, familiar sigh inside. The room was bathed in light, not the pale light of morning or the silver light of dusk, but a steady golden glow, as if the air itself carried the memory of every sunset the house had ever seen. Curtains swayed just slightly, though the windows were closed. Against the far wall stood a small couch, its fabric worn soft. A knitted throw was draped across it, the stitches loose in places from years of use. Beside it, a table with a single candle unlit, yet its wick carried the faintest scent of smoke, as though it had only just been blown out. She stepped further. Inside, her fingertips grazing the couch's arm, the knitted throw warm beneath her touch. It was here, more than anywhere, that she felt him. Not a shadow in a mirror this time, not a warmth in the air, but a presence so near she could almost hear the sound of his breathing, slow and even, in rhythm with her own. She sat down, and the cushion yielded as though another had been sitting there moments before, her hands folded loosely in her lap, and she let her eyes wander over the room, the way the light pooled in corners, the gentle drift of dust in the air, the stillness that was somehow alive. Then, without warning, the golden light brightened just enough to make her blink. It wasn't harsh, only fuller, as if the room had taken a breath. She closed her eyes. The warmth brushed her cheek like a hand, and in that quiet, she heard the faintest whisper, not in her ears, but in her chest. Welcome home. A deep calm settled into her bones. She understood now this was not just a house, it was a place. Built of all the moments they had once shared, stitched together by the quiet persistence of love. The rooms had kept them safe, and the light had been waiting for her to find it again. When she opened her eyes, the room looked exactly the same, and yet she knew something had shifted. Every door in the manor now stood unlocked, curtains drifted in slow harmony with the sea's breath. The walls seemed to glow faintly, as if carrying the memory of her smile. That evening, she walked through the house slowly, pausing in each room: the scarf room, the piano room, the library with its mirror, the bottle shelves, the desk with the unaddressed letters, and at last, the golden room. She left each door open behind her. By the time night came, the whole house seemed to hum in one long, contented exhale. The sea beyond the cliff whispered its endless song, and the stars hung low and soft above the roof. In bed, with the windows open to the salt, sweet air, Liora lay still, listening. The light she had found now lived within her, glowing steady, like candlelight that never goes out. And in that warmth, she drifted into dreams that felt less like dreams, and more like returning to something she had always known.